We're here for all 12-step programs and all addictions, but I do talk about direct related to the food. Hey, by the way, 75% of our country has a problem with it, or either overweight or obese, so it's a good place to start. So with the food, when we try to control it, again, using the self through restriction and diets and trying to figure it out, I had like tons of self-help books or diet books, or I went to all kinds of professionals, read everything on how to do it, to control it. I thought of the other day, I remember going to a nutritionist and she said, well, what you do is, she had all these ideas on how to control my eating. She said, one idea to do is to brush your teeth, right? If you get hungry at night, just, maybe if you have to do it a few times, brushing your teeth. So I tried all of these things, but I never had the perception changes when I'm centered and wanting God's will for myself, which is healthy food, or my body's God's temple. I never thought about it that way. I was always trying to fight it and control it. The more you resist something, the more power you give it, the more you're thinking about it. So all of the things I've tried, and again, going back to Dr. Silkworth said, there's only one solution, a spiritual solution. Again, he said the doctors and experts of the day couldn't figure out this problem with this addiction to alcohol, obsession, and we have the same with food or any drug or people. We always talk about that too. So the only solution, and again, it's amazing, a lot of people say the book is so old and it's antiquated, but here we are, how many years later? And still, scientists haven't figured out. With all the stomach surgery and all the ways of doing it, there's no solution. And I also talked about, I was listening to the internet about a month ago, and there were all these experts on, and I was watching something about diets and dieting, and all the experts there, they had all kinds of ways of doing it, all kinds of, it says in the big book, if a better morals, a philosophy of life could make us better, we would have recovered long ago. So all of these ideas, scientific morals and philosophies, and they all had their PhD and all kinds of other advanced degrees, scientists and doctors and whatever. And with all of that, they didn't talk about one thing was missing. It was at least an hour long. They didn't use the word spiritual. And I started to realize when I worked these steps in the program, step 1 says, I'm powerless, I can't do it. And through these steps, I've been recovered, but not only from my food addiction, alcoholism, drugs, but also all the problems it talks about in the book, many places. We resolved all our problems, because all the problems are related to the self. And we're getting centered, and a lot of times they use it like being in the zone, like when you're in sports. If you try to hit a golf ball or like say catch a ball or whatever you're doing, you can't trying to figure out how to put you on where it is. It's when you're centered in what's called in the zone. It's saying we could be in the spiritual zone. If you liked the video so far, press the like and subscribe button. So the question is this, when it comes to, how do you stay centered? Well, we have to understand what's getting us out of centered, and all the things I read about talks about all of the what's called the defects of character, which are related to the self. Selfishness, self-centeredness. So the same with our addictions. When we try to figure it out through the self, or we say, it could be money, success, or another things of the flesh. Food is one of them. So when I say I need this food and I believe my crazy thinking, because then I'm off the rails, when I become obsessed with my addiction, we had it in step 2 says being restored to sanity. And this is the way, this is directly related. It's really interesting. And the 10-step promises to me talk so much about the food, because this is what happens when we're centered. And the way, again, to do it is to get out of the self, because, resentment, anger, all of these, again, talking about the 7 deadly sins, pride being number 1, is related to the ego. So when we look at life through a higher consciousness, right, we're really spiritual people. And I had read where I said in that answering the text, I had said that the problem was that the thing is that we are really spiritual beings. We were meant to be naturally, just like our physical body knows what to do, our mind, when we let go, cannot be, if you wake up in the morning and you're out of the self-centered fear, you cannot be help but being joyous and happy in the day. Come to our free Zoom meeting, see info and description. Now back to our video. You just wake up and that's the natural way to be. But because God gave us this intellect, we misuse it. We misuse it towards our addictions. The intellect says, I have a better idea. But we were grown up that way in our society. They told us we had to be better at schoolwork or sports or We like the movie stars. So it's all related to things of the flesh, food being one of them. Understanding we got a way, the ego tells, I'll have this big plate of food, I'll feel better. Temporarily it works, but over the long term, it's not the perception change. This is much more pain when we go into things of the flesh, because it takes us off-centered, and then of course in addiction to food, it causes all the illnesses, right, and all the distortion of the body, and just devastation, and not only physical, but when I eat healthy and do God's will towards the food, have that spirituality towards my food, then I'm just happy and joyous. It's just amazing. And our society is so crazy, not even to get into all the corporations, Unfortunately, we live in times where we're brainwashed by the poisons. Just like, again, a good example, we were brainwashed years and years ago with cigarette smoking. If you look on the internet and look at the commercials there, and all the doctors and scientists of the day would get on there and say, it's good for your throat, it soothes it, and there's nothing wrong with it. Again, it has to do with the corporations and the big money. So do you want to be a slave, or do you want to be a free man or woman, or be free? Do you want to be free? This program and these steps will set you free. I have the steps right here. This is my diet program. Right? This will intuitively let me know when the 10-step promises says all of that. What does it say? Let's read the 10-step promises and then get your shares ready, okay, everybody? So on the 10-step promises, if you go to page 85, it says, "For we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol." We could put food in there. So when we're dieting, I was on a strict diet, the Gray Sheet diet, for a year. I was fighting every day, so miserable. Amazing how miserable I was. It worked, and I got down to my goal weight, but then eventually I gained the weight. It didn't matter. We have to just ask yourselves, and we know the statistics are 95% of diets fail, and the 5% who stay on it are miserable. The only true way to do it is to have that perception change, a spiritual awakening. And it says here, "For by this time sanity will have returned." So we had to realize our thinking was insane the way it was. "We will seldom be interested in liquor or food," we could put in there. "If tempted, we recoil from it like a hot flame. We react sanely and normally." Again, the whole topic was what to do to get centered. To react sanely and normally is to have that new pair of glasses, perception through the spiritual. If you liked the video so far, press the like and subscribe button. Come to our free Zoom meeting. See info in description. Now back to our video. Do you realize that animals, they know exactly what to eat? You ever see them in the wilderness? They know how much to eat. They're not, I use the term fat or obese. We know too. We have the ability, but we get in our own way with the intellect and getting off-centered. But when we pray, meditate, and you get centered, and when you have those urges towards your addiction, you could just look at them. Observe when you're resentful, angry, or if you're hungry, or whatever it is, or you're lusting after something. You can observe it. You don't have to make your feelings and emotions part of your thinking, because it's all false. You have 10 people in the room, and they all have 10 different opinions. Your opinions are what your people in the world told you, what the commercials on TV told you about the food and everything, and the internet and everything, the songs. That's what your formulation of what you think about your addiction. But when we want to know the truth, not the falseness of it. It's false. It's really false. When you have a thought you need all of this food, just when you look at it and you observe it and realize the falseness of it. So it goes on to say, that is the miracle of it. It is without any thought or effort on our part. This is on page 85. We are not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. Then one more point here. You hear people say, "I'm recovered," and it says in the beginning of our book, "We who have recovered." So people say, well, how could you be totally recovered? And and it says here on the next paragraph on page 85, "We are not cured of alcoholism, food addiction, but we are recovered. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition." I had read all of those passages from the big book where it talks about on awakening and those other things I had read of the fear prayers. We have a solution now. Before, I never had a solution. We must carry the visions of God's will into our activities. So is God's will to make food your higher power? Is God's will for you to make people your higher power, to get resentful, angry, jealous, envious? We have that joy and happiness within us, but we bury it with what's called, again, I referred to step 4, the defects of character. But they can be cast out, and we can have a new way of living and be reborn in thinking. The only way out, Dr. Will Silkworth saw, was not through the synthetic knowledge he talks about in the doc's opinion. And today, can you imagine that? We've gone to the moon and all the scientific advances of the day, the internet, Zoom meetings, and they still haven't figured it out. No matter what they try and do, the obsession always returns. Go to page 14 in Bill's story. And he says there in the first, it's a small paragraph, but the first full paragraph, simple but not easy, a price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. And then I started to realize in the book here, as we go through, right on page 63, of course, that's where it talks about in how it works, the third step prayer, and mainly it talks about being reborn, but it says, relieve me of bond yourself. And then I thought of a couple other examples of why we get centered, how we get centered, or why we're not centered. On page 64, right before the steps, what does it say near the bottom? Was it ourself, the word self, esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened, so we were sore, we were burnt up. And it goes on after that, right, to say self-esteem, security, again, our ambitions. We have a few more places, right? You go to page 68. This is where the fear prayers are. There are 2 of them on that page. But it says here, perhaps there is a better way. That's on about the second paragraph, the first fear prayer. The basis of trusting and relying upon God, we trust infinite God rather than ourselves. We are in the world to play the role he assigns. Then I also thought about page 86. On page 86, and this is when we awaken, it's retiring at night is the first one, and then on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. That reminds me, of course, and I didn't have it here, but let's go to page 62. What does it say? It's telling us, again, it's relating to the self, the ego. Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, the first full paragraph on page 62. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and retaliate. So we used a few examples right before the meetings, and I thought of, going off the rails. They say, if I can keep life straightforward, doing my higher consciousness, right? But as soon as I get involved with my own thinking, and it explains it here in many places, then I start going what's called off the rails, or I start getting out of center. And of course, the promises which we read here, and related to our addiction, ask the question, what to do, or how do you get centered? That's our natural state, happy, joyous, and free. Let go, get out of your own way. If you're not happy and centered now, you're thinking of the self, thinking of the past or future, both false realities. We only have the present. It's about letting go. And, when we're not in the I call the zone, or being centered, or being a higher consciousness, or spiritual, or being joyful and happy, we're thinking of the self. And in the big book, actually going right back to that, in many places it discusses that, talks about that.